So Vice President J.D. Vance went to go speak at the Munich security conference the other day. I haven't watched it yet, so I wanted to watch it and see what he says, because there's been a lot of contention about it. People have been like getting super butthurt on one place and kind of chilling on the other. So I figured we could watch it. You can make up your own minds. I wanted to at least get a chance to watch it.
Well, thank you, and thanks to all the gathered delegates and luminaries and professionals, and thanks especially to the host of the Munich Security Conference. For being able to put on such an incredible event. We're, of course, thrilled to be here. We're happy to be here. One of the things that I wanted to, fortunate enough to be given political power by our respective peoples, to use it wisely to improve their lives. And I was fortunate in my time here to spend some time outside the walls of this conference over the last 24 hours. And I've been so impressed by the hospitality of the people, even as, of course, as they're reeling from yesterday's horrendous attack.
Apparently, the attack he's talking about is there was a, I believe it was like a car attack. Dozens hurt in suspected car ramming attack in Munich before German election. At least 30 people were hurt when a car that was being driven by an Afghan national plowed into a crowd in Munich on Thursday of this past week in what the state premier said was probably an attack. I don't know if probably would be the way I would have phrased that. I think it was pretty clear at this point. Putting security back in focus before next week's federal election. The suspected attack came hours before international leaders, including U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, were due to arrive in the southern German city for the Munich security conference. At least 30 people were injured, some of them seriously, according to the latest police report. Police say a white car had approached police vehicles that were accompanying a demonstration of striking workers. There was a group of workers on strike that were just walking around, and a 24-year-old Afghan refugee, essentially Afghan national, drove a car into the crowd of people. The suspect's name was Farhad Nouri, based on what the general prosecutor's office said. One shot was fired at the suspect, but he was not hit. So this is the car. He was driving Mini Cooper. Wow, he wrecked that thing too, man. He was in Germany illegally. Immigration and security issues had dominated campaigning ahead of the February 23rd election. That's what he's referring to.
Was with my wife, actually, who's here with me today, on a personal trip. And I've always loved the city of Munich, and I've always loved its people. And I just want to say that we're very moved, and our thoughts and prayers are with Munich and everybody affected by the evil inflicted on this beautiful community. We're thinking about you, we're praying for you, and we will certainly be rooting for you in the days and weeks to come. Now, I hope that's not the last bit of applause that I get, but...
He's like, wait, don't applaud just yet. I'm about to say some savage stuff to you. Hold on. Hold your applause.
Of course, to discuss security, and normally we mean threats to our external security. I see many great military leaders gathered here today. But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense. The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within.
That's pretty massive. He doesn't think the biggest threat to Europe is Russia or China. He thinks that the biggest threat to Europe is the threat from within. Not sure what he means by that. It could just mean, like, I don't think that he means the people. I think that he means, if I had to interpret what he's saying, I would assume that what he means by that is that he believes the folks that are currently in power are the ones that are the greatest threat to the European nations. That's what I would interpret him as having said, if I had to guess.
The retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values shared with the United States of America. Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could happen in Germany too. Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. For years, we've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. team. We must do more than talk
That's fair.
about democratic values. We
are on the same team.
Now, within living memory of many of you in this room, the Cold War positioned defenders of democracy against much more tyrannical forces on this continent. And consider the side in that fight that censored dissidents, that closed churches, that canceled elections. Were they the good guys? Certainly not. And thank God they lost the Cold War. They lost because they neither valued nor respected all of the extraordinary blessings of liberty. The freedom to surprise, to make mistakes, to invent, to build. As it turns out, you can't mandate innovation or creativity.
No.
Just as you can't force people what to think, what to feel, or what to believe. And we believe those things are certainly connected.
That's true.
And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action.
So obviously this has been a crazy thing for the past while, like the whole censorship debate for the internet. Like, I think personally, there are certain things that definitely need to be staying off the internet. Like, obviously things that are causing harm to people, like things that prevent human trafficking, things that prevent harm to children. That should be like a no-brainer and everyone's on the same page with that. Totally cool. And I definitely think that, like explicit content probably shouldn't be on social media either, just because kids have access to that stuff and it's not good for your brains, for brain development, especially for young men. That stuff, I get like wanting to keep that off of like channels that everybody seems to traverse on a regular basis. But as far as expression and freedom of ideas, I'm kind of the same mindset that Joe Rogan is. And I love Joe Rogan. I think he's one of the guys I like look up to the most in like the podcasting world and stuff like that, because of just like the way with words that he has. You got to have the freedom to express ideas, because at the end of the day, like if you've got a big group of people and they're all expressing ideas and one guy says some horribly horrific stuff that's like terrible, people are going to see that and be like, that's terrible. Let's not be like that. And they'll shun that person, and that person, the good ideas are going to win, because the people that have these terrible ideas or terrible takes aren't going to go anywhere, because the cream's going to rise to the top, so to speak. So like the problem is yeah, people engage with rage bait stuff. That's a problem, right?
I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago, the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge,
yes, I think it's an important distinction to be made, that the ideas are what need to be shunned, not necessarily the person that's expressing the idea. Exactly. People should be able to say whatever they want. If it's a terrible thing to say, then everyone should be like, hey, dude, that's terrible, as a consensus across the whole board. You know, like maybe that's not the greatest way to look at it. And then that person's still free to kind of do what they want and say what they want, but becomes the general consensus across the whole board that everyone's like, that idea that that person said is dumb. That is a dumb idea. That's not good. That's not beneficial to anybody. It's not like a good take. Let the people that have bad takes make their bad takes, and then hopefully the good takes are the ones that become the general consensus, because we see it a lot. I've been on X a little bit too, and like there's, for the most part, it's pretty free speech. There's some obviously people that get a lot of engagement get boosted the most, because like if you've got a lot of followers and you get reposted by the right accounts that also have lots of followers, then your stuff gets seen a little bit better. There can become those echo chambers where you've got like large groups of people that all believe a certain idea that may not necessarily be good on either side. That can be kind of a weird area, but people should still be able to freely discuss stuff. So
Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief. And perhaps most concerningly,
yeah, you're going to offend people.
Very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded demanded to know what he was praying for. Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before.
I got a lot of friends that are in England, just to be 100% fair. I got a lot of buddies that are out there that served in the Royal Marine Commandos. I got friends that served in the Royal Marines and also the British Army and the British Royal Air Force. I got a lot of friends over there. I don't necessarily know what a lot of their opinions are of this stuff, but there's been a lot of weird rules and laws that have been passed about social media conduct and how you can, like, you know, get prosecuted legally for saying something that was offensive to somebody else. Like, that's a real problem. I think that at the end of the day, like, again, if you're not physically harming somebody and you're not harming children, you're not inciting riots, and you're not doing like crazy stuff like that, you gotta let people express their feelings and beliefs, even if it's to the contrary of what you may personally feel yourself. You just don't engage with it, you know, and move on, you know.
The officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution.
Bro, that is
I
wild.
say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no, this last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law.
What?
Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizens suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. And in the interest of comedy, my friends, but also in the interest of truth, I will admit that sometimes the loudest voices for censorship have come not from within Europe, but from within my own country, where the prior administration threatened and bullied social media companies to censor so-called misinformation. Misinformation like, for example, the idea that coronavirus had likely leaped from a laboratory in China. Our own government encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to utter what turned out to be an obvious truth. So I come here today not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite, and I hope that we can work together on that. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump,
there's a new sheriff in town.
We may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree.
We may not agree with you on stuff, but we'll fight for your ability to express how you feel about stuff, whether we agree with it or not. That is the important thing. It should be like that across the board. Like, no matter what side. Part of the reason why everybody over there was like super not happy about this speech probably is because, like, there's been a lot of discussions about cutting monetary benefits from the United States. Like, the United States has been talking about like pulling back how much funding they're giving to all these European countries, the EU and NATO and all that stuff. And so they've got a real bad taste in their mouth right now.
Point, of course, that the situation has gotten so bad that this December, based on the flimsy suspicions of an intelligence agency and enormous pressure from its continental neighbors. Now, as I understand it, the argument was that Russian disinformation had infected the Romanian elections. But I'd ask my European friends to have some perspective. You can believe it's wrong for Russia to buy social media advertisements to influence your elections. We certainly do. You can condemn it on the world stage even.
Yeah, I could see that.
Democracy can be destroyed with a few $100,000 of digital advertising from a foreign country, then it wasn't very strong to begin with. Now, the good news is that I happen to think your democracies are substantially less brittle than many people apparently fear. And I really do believe that allowing our citizens to speak their mind will make them stronger still.
You make a good point. So Gorilla Patrick says it was proven that Russia financed the candidate. So I don't know. I didn't do any research on that particular one. I've heard that people were saying that Russia financed the candidate because the court saw that they were giving money to his campaign. It's hard to keep track of everything that's happening in every single country on earth and also the United States. Too much, there's not enough space in your brain for it. So it's tough for me to like really comment eloquently and like from a point of like, I know what happened kind of thing on this. I've heard a lot of different things.
Where the organizers of this very conference have banned lawmakers representing populist parties on both the left and the right from participating in these conversations. Now again, we don't have to agree with everything or anything that people say, but when people represent, when political leaders represent an important constituency, it is incumbent upon us to at least participate in dialogue with them. To many of us on the other side of the Atlantic, it looks more and more like old entrenched interests hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation, who simply don't like the idea that somebody with an alternative viewpoint might express a different opinion or, God forbid, vote a different way or, even worse, win an election. Now, this is a security conference, and I'm sure you all came here prepared to talk about how exactly you intend to increase defense spending over the next few years in line with some new target. And that's great, because as President Trump has made abundantly clear, he believes that our European friends must play a bigger role in the future of this continent. We don't think you hear this term, burden sharing, but we think it's an important part of being in a shared alliance together that the Europeans step up while America focuses on areas of the world that are in great danger. But let me also ask you, how will you even begin to think through the kinds of budgeting questions if we don't know what it is that we're defending in the first place? I've heard a lot already in my conversations, and I've had many, many great conversations with many people gathered here in this room.
I don't think so.
I've heard a lot about what you need to defend yourselves from. And of course, that's important. But what has seemed a little bit less clear to me, and certainly I think to many of the citizens of Europe, is what exactly it is that you're defending yourselves for. What is the positive vision that animates this shared security compact that we all believe is so important?
Yeah, I don't think that's what he meant either.
Deeply that there is no security if you are afraid of the voices and the conscience that guide your very own people. Europe faces many challenges, but the crisis this continent faces right now, the crisis I believe we all face together, is one of our own making. Elected me and elected President Trump. You need democratic mandates to accomplish anything of value in the coming years. Have we learned nothing that thin mandates produce unstable results? But there is so much of value that can be accomplished with the kind of democratic mandate that I think will come from being more responsive to the voices of your citizens. If you're going to enjoy competitive economies, if you're going to enjoy affordable energy and secure supply chain, then you need mandates to govern, because you have to make difficult choices to enjoy all of these things. And of course, we know that very well in America. You cannot win a democratic mandate by censoring your opponents or putting them in jail, whether that's the leader of the opposition, a humble Christian praying in her own home, or a journalist trying to report the news. Nor can you win one by disregarding your basic electorate on questions like who gets to be a part of our shared society. And of all the pressing challenges that the nations represented here face, I believe there is nothing more urgent than mass migration. Today, almost 1 in 5 people living in this country moved here from abroad. That is, of course, an all-time high. It's a similar number, by the way, in the United States, also an all-time high. The number of immigrants who entered the EU from non-EU countries doubled between 2021 and 2022 alone, and of course, it's gotten much higher since. And we know the situation, it didn't materialize in a vacuum. It's the result of a series of conscious decisions made by politicians all over the continent and others across the world over the span of a decade. We saw the horrors wrought by these decisions yesterday in this very city. And of course, I can't bring it up again without thinking about the terrible victims who had a beautiful winter day in Munich ruined. Our thoughts and prayers are with them and will remain with them. But why did this happen in the first place? It's a terrible story, but it's one we've heard way too many times in Europe and unfortunately too many times in the United States as well. An asylum seeker, often a young man in his mid-20s, already known to police, rams a car into a crowd and shatters a community.
Yeah, crazy, man.
How many times must we suffer these appalling setbacks before we change course and take our shared civilization in a new direction? No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration.
There's a couple things in here. It says, don't worry, once the shooting war starts of World War III, we'll be top-tier besties again, yeah. At the end of the day, like, we are here to work with each other, to support each other, but it's, people are just fighting with each other constantly. Like, we got to figure out a way to coexist with each other without, like, constantly being at each other's throats. We only got one planet, you know what I'm saying? Like, got to find a way to, like, find prosperity for your people without, like, lying, cheating, and stealing. You know, if you got problems because you got crazy crazy immigration. You can't have a country without borders. Like, that's just the fact. Like, if you don't have borders and you're just letting anybody in, like, then you don't have a country. You know, you have to have some sort of secure border, regardless of what country you're in. And I mean, I feel like that should be like common sense thing. You know, you got to be able to vet the people that are coming to your country from other countries, because you want to make sure that they're going to obey your laws and that they are there to contribute to your society, regardless of what country you're in. I will also say Europe has become far too dependent on the United States for its safety. They need to learn to be prepared to defend themselves. Everybody's become very comfortable with the position that they've been in for a while. This is a very uncomfortable time for a lot of people, especially in Europe.
Now, I happen to agree with a lot of these concerns, but you don't have to agree with me. I just think that people care about their homes, they care about their dreams, they care about their safety and their capacity to provide for themselves and their children. And they're smart. I think this is one of the most important things I've learned in my brief time in politics. Contrary to what you might hear a couple mountains over in Davos, the citizens of all of our nations don't generally think of themselves as educated animals or as interchangeable cogs of a global economy. And it's hardly surprising that they don't want to be shuffled about or relentlessly ignored by their leaders. And it is the business of democracy to adjudicate these big questions at the ballot box. I believe that dismissing people, dismissing their concerns, or worse yet, shutting down media, shutting down elections, or shutting people out of the political process protects nothing. In fact, it is the most surefire way to destroy democracy. And speaking up and expressing opinions isn't election interference. Even when people express views outside your own country, and even when those people are very influential. And trust me, I say this with all humor, if American democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding, you guys can survive a few months of Elon Musk.
He said, if the United States can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg, then you guys can survive a few years of Elon Musk. And nobody said a word, man. Everybody was like, oh, you could have heard a pin drop in that room, man. Oh, dude. That's a tough one, man. I thought that was funny. But yeah, I mean, he's like, they did not appreciate that comment, dude. They were pissed.
American, German, or European will survive is telling millions of voters that their thoughts and concerns, their aspirations, their pleas for relief are invalid or unworthy of even being considered. Democracy rests on the sacred principle that the voice of the people matters. There's no room for firewalls. You either uphold the principle or you don't. Europeans, the people, have a voice. European leaders have a choice. And my strong belief is that we do not need to be afraid of the future. You can embrace what your people tell you, even when it's surprising, even when you don't agree. And if you do so, you can face the future with certainty and with confidence, knowing that the nation stands behind each of you. And that, to me, is the great magic of democracy. It's not in these stone buildings or beautiful hotels. It's not even in the great institutions that we have built together as a shared society. To believe in democracy is to understand that each of our citizens has wisdom and has a voice. And if we refuse to listen to that voice, even our most successful fight will secure very little.
Cicella says the one thing Vance is doing very well is reinforcing the invitation for other countries to cooperate and work with the U.S. Well, and that's the thing. He's not being like, again, he's not being rude. He's not being abrasive. He's not name calling. He's not like saying, you're a bunch of dummies. Like, you're all and stupid and like, this is why you're all jacked up. Like, he's very eloquent. He's a good orator, is not insulting people. He's just telling them like, hey, this is how I feel about it. He's respectful. He's being respectful, and he's not being like a jerk about it. He's just telling them, like, it's like when you get a stern talking from your father. That's kind of how I look at it. And I think it may not be what they want to hear, but you know what? Sometimes you got to hear the hard things that you don't want to hear. Like, I've had it happen to me many times when I'm like I'm screwed up, and somebody tells me I'm all screwed up and says like, hey, this is why you're screwed up. And you know, sometimes I needed to hear that, so I could be like, all right, well, I need to do better. In that moment, I may be like, screw this person. I don't want to listen to what they're saying. They're just being jerk. And it's not always the case. There's some people that are going to try to tell you that this, that, and the other, and maybe they're not right, but like sometimes they are right. Being able to distinguish between that is the hard part. Trump and Australians prime minister don't like each other 1 year until elections. I'm only 19. That's a whole nother thing. I haven't been tracking like election cycle in Australia or anything. The VP is inherently the chief negotiator for the US if the VP can't get it done, then the president steps in. Vance is doing great so far. Yeah, I agree. I think he's being a good ambassador almost for the United States, you know, in the sense of the word, not like literally.
As Pope John Paul II, in my view, one of the most extraordinary champions of democracy on this continent or any other, once said, "Do not be afraid." We shouldn't be afraid of our people, even when they express views that disagree with their leadership. Thank you all. Good luck to all of you. God bless you.
Well, he made some really good points. A lot of my European friends did not like what he had to say. But then again, most people don't like receiving criticism, you know, even if it's for the right reasons. I don't know. I thought that he said some very important things that needed to be said. I'd like to know what you guys think, though. So let me know in the comments what you thought about what the vice president said. And as always, we'll see you in the next video.